Mary, first of all, I'm so excited to connect with you. I first heard your name from Stephanie Mae Wilson's podcast.
Yeah.
And I just started to look into your work, and I picked up your book, Underestimated, which is
Nice.
my summer book. You can see I have like so many pages marked, but it's truly one of my favorite books. I love everything you stand for. It's been so encouraging for me just, on a professional journey as well. So I've just been really looking forward to this conversation, and I'm so excited to sit down and chat with you.
Oh, I love that. Thanks for reading it.
Yeah, absolutely. So for listeners, Mary, who are not familiar with your story, you really do have an incredible story. Can you just share a snippet with folks so they understand a bit about your background and why you wrote this book?
Yeah, I always like to say if there were like an elevator pitch version of my life or my story, movie montage, whatever, one of the most important things to know is that I grew up in a single wide trailer in rural West Virginia.
Wow.
Emphasis on single wide. I think sometimes people can picture like a really nice double wide with a permanent foundation, but really like whatever dilapidated, rundown stock photo you have in your head of trailer in West Virginia, that's pretty much it. Or you can go to thebookdirt.com and that's my first book, Dirt, and the cover of that book is the actual trailer I grew up in.
Oh my goodness.
And then, fast forward to my life and I end up at Yale for law school, which is, Jacqueline, quite the whiplash moment.
I can imagine.
That's in some ways that's not the outcome we usually expect for a start like that. And then in other ways, it's an underdog trope we're super familiar with. We've read this book, we've watched this movie, and so there has been kind of that cloud of both, I would say, over my life, where in the book, in Underestimated, actually in the last chapter, I say, the underdog is a role of a lifetime. And what I mean by that is if we're not careful, we could spend our whole lives playing that part.
Yeah.
And so, I think like having that start and then getting to a place like Yale, a lot of people would assume that that's sort of this moment of arrival, that moment when you do stop underestimating yourself. But the truth is, for me, it actually kicked off 20 more years of being addicted to achieving for my worth and never still feeling like I belonged, no matter how much I accomplished, that there is no amount of more that can ever stop make you stop feeling less than. That has always been an inside job. And so that's kind of that's a really, skyscraper elevator pitch of my story. We went all the way to the top there, but that's the idea is I've really viewed a lot of my life through that lens of the underdog and then what it looks like to finally let go of playing that part and step into true significance.
Yeah. I mean, I think every single listener will relate to this at some point or another in their lives, because I feel like, whether folks had a similar background or upbringing to your own, or folks who had everything given to them, there always is that sense of, is there more, right? And finding fulfillment, whether it's in a career, an accomplishment, a relationship. There's always that sense of, does this define me? Or rather, this does define me for most folks, but it is about flipping that mental script. One thing though, Mary, that you really talk about that I kind of want it to be the foundation of this conversation, and we're going to go down some rabbit holes because as I was thinking last night, I'm like, there's just so much I want to pick your brain on, so many good topics in this book. But one thing that really stuck with me is this whole concept of fear, right? And I mean, fear is something everyone struggles with. And, I guess my first question for you is, how does fear use like our perceived missteps as evidence against us, right? And I found that in my life too. That's typically what I tend to do. I ruminate on past decisions. I ruminate on mistakes. And then I find that kind of like leads to decision paralysis, right? Going forward in the future when you're contemplating things you did wrong in the past.
Yeah, 100%. So, Jacqueline, the whole book is really based around this idea of fear's a really boring liar. When you really boil it down to it, fear does not have a lot of new material it's working with.
Yeah.
The same lies it's using on us today, it's been using on humans for thousands of years. The same lies it uses on me, it's using on you. The same lies it uses on you, it's using on the person listening to this episode right now. And I can prove it, right? It's all been done. It's all been done better. It's all been done by somebody the world actually wants to pay attention to. I can't start until it's perfect. I can't start until I am perfect. What if I start and the critics come? What if they say, who does she think she is? What if I fail and it proves all the people who said I don't have what it takes that they were right about me all along?
Right.
What if I start and I can't stay consistent with it? What if I don't have the bandwidth? What if my voice doesn't really matter? What if I don't really matter? What if it's already too late, right? Chances are, for if we were playing bingo or somebody listening was playing Fear's a Punk bingo, we would have just gotten it up, down, sideways, and diagonally, right?
I love that.
It's pretty clear. And so, when we think about this idea of fear sort of being this force one of the dots that connected for me in writing this book is like, what if fear attacks creatives in particular because it is jealous that it itself is not creative at all? And that was actually kind of a mind-exploding emoji moment for me, because when you think about it, from if we were to come at it from a faith perspective, for example, for me, in my faith, I was made in the image of a creator. Therefore, I'm an inherently creative being. So it makes sense that the opposite of that, the enemy of that, would lack creativity. It would be the antithesis of that. And so, fear really comes after us and wants us to stay stuck. It wants us to play small because it is the opposing force to the good work we are put here to put into the world. And so that kind of builds into then all of the different chapters or all these different faces of fear. Fear is not a very creative enemy, but it is a slippery one. So it will put on different masks. You catch perfectionism coming in the front door. It's going to try to slip in the side doors, imposter syndrome. And so chapter by chapter, I'm going through all those faces. Bring me back to your original question. I felt like we needed to lay all that groundwork, but I want to make sure we actually answered that original question.
That was a super helpful foundational overview. But, I guess my question for you is, what is the first step someone should take with that fear mindset? And you talk about this whole concept of reframing. And this has been very helpful for myself as well, because I've found, Mary, and I'm sure you have as well, that thoughts are not truth, right? Our emotions are not truth. And, coming from a Christian background as well, like, it's all about taking our thoughts captive, right? And I always align, like, is what I'm thinking, does that align with what the Bible says? And if the answer is no, you really have to actually, like, take the thought captive, right? Like, it is an action. You have to be disciplined with it. But yeah, what's the first step, I guess, in how to, like, reframe the way we think of fear?
Yeah. So a couple of things are going to come to mind right off the bat. The first is, like I just mentioned, fear is not a very creative force, short of being given two gifts. It has the ability to throw its voice to sound like us, because if it sounded like, Morgan Freeman, we could catch it every time.
Morgan.
He's like, I hope I can make it across the border. We're like, fear showed up. Amazing. But it doesn't. It sounds like us. The other thing I mentioned earlier is it's slippery and it has the ability to shapeshift into different masks. But going back to that first one, because it sounds like us, there's a really good saying that is, the fish don't know the water's toxic because they are so immersed in it. So because it just feels like you're running monologue, we do this very tricky sleight of hand with fear, where because fear knows us inside and out, because it knows those times when we have failed or fallen or come up short, because it knows any of the shame that we're carrying around, because fear knows us well, we then slip to giving it and attributing to it a veracity and an integrity that it does not have. We assume because it knows us that it also wants what's best for us, or that it's going to tell us the truth. So when fear says, oh, you shouldn't do that, you're probably not very good at that, or it's all been done, or, oh, what if you fail? We go, oh gosh, fear knows so much about me. Fear's probably right about that. If fear showed up, then maybe I'm not cut out for this. What if, in fact, the reframe is that it's exactly the opposite? Because fear is not a very creative guy, but he is a busy guy. And like any good productive overachiever, he's going to prioritize. So if you're already hiding in plain sight, playing small, doing work that does not matter, fear's mostly going to leave you alone. But show up and start to do work that's going to change things, that's going to change lives, that's going to help people, that's going to move the world forward. And you better expect fear to show up teeth bared and snarling. We're going to see that mask fall off and land with a thud as we get a glimpse of just how venomous it can be. And for me, in my life, when I started stepping into the work I was most called to do, that's when the volume on fear turned way up, not way down. So it's the opposite. It's actually when we're doing the work we're most created to do, the fear is going to get the loudest. So the flip of the script is, fear just showed up. Good. We're about to do work that matters. Otherwise, it wouldn't be bothered with us.
I love that. The greater your calling, the greater the attack, right?
New levels, new devils.
I love that. Right. And also too, Mary, I'm curious, have you noticed, like, have you found that the older you get, like, the more fear around decisions you have?
I think it's like, so kind of like going back to like the initial heart of your question of like, what do we do first? What do we do here? We learn to name fear faster. That's really truly the work of this book. And we can get into all of this, but one of the most important tactical tools that I have in the book is, we know that humans are wired to learn best by story and by very unexpected visual, visceral metaphors. Mountains and mustard seeds. What? Like, where did that come from? But we don't forget it, right? Oh, if you have the faith of a mustard seed, you can move a mountain.
Right.
Birds and wildflowers, rocky soil, right? There's just metaphor after metaphor after metaphor, because the greatest teacher who ever walked the planet knows that when people are if they need to learn it and actually remember it to be able to pass it on, story and unexpected metaphor are it. So when you're immersed like that fish in the toxic water, what this book does is it does the heavy lifting to give you really unexpected visual metaphors to be able to pull that to mind in the minute, right?
Yeah.
So in chapter 4, for example, second guessing is a missing handbook. I compare that, when we're walking around the world feeling like we don't have all the pertinent parts, we're missing information. It's like Edward Scissorhands dropped down right in the middle of some pastel color-coded suburban hell where the name of the game was blending in, keeping up with your neighbors. And when we break the rules because we did not know the rules, inevitably we are the ones who end up with the scars to prove it. Well, the next time you find yourself second-guessing yourself because you feel like you're one of those kids who never got this handbook for life growing up like all the other kids in America did. Chad, pass the mashed potatoes. And oh, by the way, make sure you understand compound interest. The second that starts happening, you can go missing handbook or Edward Scissorhands. And the faster you can cut it off and catch it in the act, then the faster all of its power whooshes out of the room. I was on a podcast with Sarah Rice called This Changes Everything. And she said, it's like in The Wizard of Oz when we pull back the curtain. Suddenly the great, terrifying, powerful Oz is just this little snake oil salesman behind the curtain. And so, you ask the question, as I get older, do I feel more fear? Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that I have more responsibilities. When my husband and I first leaped and started our photography business, we did not yet have a mortgage. We didn't have employees depending on us. We didn't have inflation, all the hashtag realities of 2025. And so there can be more at stake. But I have also put in the reps of learning to catch fear in the act. And so like any good daily discipline, I've gotten better at it over time. So you want to write a book on taking fear down, cutting it off at the ankles, taking it down at the knees. Ooh, you want to talk about being attacked by fear for the last 12 months and especially the last 2 months, 3 months as I launched this book. But I had all the tools in my belt to go, really? You're really going to say it's all been done to me when I literally called that out on page 22? Like, I know what you're doing. And the fact that fear could not be bothered to come up with new material on me, even though I've literally already written it down, just proves what a boring enemy we actually have.
Yeah, that's so good, Mary. The first thing that comes to mind too is I think of just, again, like the voice of truth, right? And even for me, talk about leap of faith. So I don't know if you know too much about my background, but I worked in finance, Mary, for the past 8 years. So I told you I graduated from Babson College, small entrepreneurship school right outside Boston. Worked in finance for the past 8 years, started WellnStrong in 2020, which basically came out of my mom's journey with stage 4 breast cancer. I was always super passionate about integrative medicine. But that was kind of the foundation from which I built it. Again, in 2020, God touched it. It just grew over the past, 4 or 5 years. And it got to a point, Mary, it was not sustainable in terms of work-life balance, having these 2 jobs. So I prayed about it last year. And then in December, I decided to quit my job, which, your golden handcuffs, the corporate life, it was difficult, but that certainly was a leap of faith. And as much as I had to, focus on the voice of truth, I also had to focus on shutting out external voices, right? Like even the ones outside your head, because the one inside, obviously we can, listen to 24/7, but it's also important to discern and, cut off those voices that aren't speaking truth, external to our minds, right?
Yes, 100%. Like I go into a lot of that in the book, actually, especially in chapter 12, which is criticism as an inside job, but it's talking about, do you hear this? Can you hear that?
A little bit. What is that?
I think our neighbor's landscapers just showed up. Hold on a second.
You're fine. Barely.
I swear, they come at a different time and a different day every week. There is no
You're
scheduling
fine.
around it.
I don't hear anything now. You're good.
Okay. Do you remember the last thing that I
Voice
said?
of criticisms, chapter 12.
Yep. So it talks about both, the criticisms that are coming from within the house, the calls coming from inside the house. But it's also talking about other people. And so there's going to be just those nameless, faceless, cheap seats hurling, projectiles down onto the field kind of critics.
Yeah.
And then there's also going to be what I call limiting belief leaks, which come from your family of origin or your friends, where the limitations and the limiting beliefs they have put on themselves now become this filter for how they see the world and see what you're doing. And so these things might just fly out of their mouths about what they would say about themselves doing the thing you're trying to do. Like, you're going to quit this safe job and start a business. Like, that'll never work. And they don't even realize they're doing it a lot of the time. It's like a knee-jerk reaction for them. And something I talk about a lot in the book is 99.9% of statistics are made up on the spot. And 99.9% of people are not blessed with the gift of being a visionary.
Right.
They do not understand a thing. They do not see a thing until it is already done. That other 0.01% of us, we are the coaches, the visionaries, the leaders, the fishers of men.
Yeah.
The rest of people will not understand a thing, will not believe in a thing until you go and you already build it and you do it. And then they will be the first in line to ask how you did it.
Yep.
And so other people's lack of vision has nothing to do with where you're being called. It has nothing to do with, if you wait on the world's approval or co-signature before you do a thing, you'll be waiting a very long time.
Yeah.
And it's the script that I give myself in moments like that when they want to speak all this doubt and all this fear about something you have been asked to do.
Yeah.
When we have to trust the sentence, that's okay. You'll meet them later.
Yeah.
They'll come back around when it's done, and then they can understand it.
Yeah.
And so you do have to protect it from people who just do not have that visionary ability.
Yeah. Do you have a certain group of people, Mary, that you just go to when you're contemplating starting something new? So I guess my question is, how do you also balance seeking wise counsel, right, from people who are visionaries, and then also taking risks and chances for something you do feel called to pursue?
Yeah, I love that. So that question reminds me of something I talk about in the book. I talk about it in chapter 7. Overthinking is an orange safety cone called the research riptide.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I was I have a master's in moral philosophy, and then as we mentioned, I went to law school.
Yeah.
I had to write big papers for both of those programs, my thesis for my master's, and then something called a substantial and an SAW in law school, 50,000 word, length documents, basically book length.
Yeah.
And 2 rules we had to follow were, number 1, we had to do enough research to understand the landscape, to understand what had already been written, the literature that was already out there, the paradigms that were already out there, the common thinking in the, thought industry on this topic. But then number 2, we had to do something to move the conversation forward. Mm-hmm. We had to contribute some sort of original, substantial thought to it. It didn't have to reinvent the wheel necessarily, but it could not just be a book report on what other people have said. And so I go on from that to talk about how now in my life, when I'm starting something new, I have to be really careful that I don't spend too much time in number 1 and that I'm always making it to number 2. Because otherwise what we can do is we can go, I'm just going to research how other people do it.
Right.
And we start to look at how they're running their businesses, what their best practices are, how they're writing voices, how they're formatting their podcasts. And it's all good information. But if we stay stuck in that riptide, pretty soon we get washed out to sea and we're in way over our heads with other people's opinions.
Yeah.
And so we have to be able to kind of glance at the world. And this is not my line. Glance at the world, gaze at God is a Carlos Whitaker line.
Yeah.
But glance at what the world is doing, gaze at where God is calling us, right? And so we get out of the research riptide like we get out of a real life riptide, which is you want to swim back towards the shore, this illusion of safety. But in reality, what you have to do is make a hard 90-degree turn from where all the trending currents are headed. And so if everybody's saying to you, gosh, what about the economy? What about this? What about that? We take it in. We understand the information. We understand the good, wise information that's out there. But then we have to be the leaders, partnering with God, of course. But we have to be the leaders of where it is that we're headed. Otherwise, it will sweep you out to sea and you will drown before you even get started.
Yep.
So that's what that reminds me of.
Yeah,
and I think it's like looking at people who are doing the things you want to do, not the people who are fearing the things you want to do.
Yeah, that's so good. And even too in your book, you say that overthinking at its core is fear of the unknown.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
And you also talk about the science behind overthinking and why it's so exhausting. And again, I'm sure every listener resonates with this as well, because, the more I find myself overthinking a situation, I physically feel exhausted, even if I didn't do anything that day.
That's right.
What is the science behind overthinking?
Yeah. Okay. So if anybody's listening has ever had writer's block, where it feels like the more you're staring at this blinking cursor, the more existential angst is getting pent up in your body. And, if it's ever felt like all the existential angst in the world gets kind of built up in your forehead, where it feels like you're trying to sneeze through your forehead to get the next sentence out, that's actually kind of a descriptor of what's going on in your brain. So when we're trying to think our way through a thinking problem, we overactivate the prefrontal cortex. And the prefrontal cortex is our color-coding, problem-solving, organized checklist. Here are the automatic rules for what's always worked before in scenarios we've been in. Let us reuse them for similar new scenarios, right? Mm-hmm. That's great for not having to remember how to brush your hair every morning or open a door. But it doesn't work when you're trying to do something you've never done before. When you're trying to innovate and originate out of, let's use rules of what's always worked before, then it doesn't work. There's a great Einstein quote of like, we can't use the same thinking that got us into the problem to get us out of the problem, essentially. And so there's this other part of our brain called the limbic brain, which is where novelty seeking and something called conceptual blending occurs. Conceptual blending is the backbone, not to confuse the metaphor with another body part, but it is the iron lightning rod of creativity and of writers and of podcasters and of thought leaders, anybody who wants to put new messages into the world, because what it's allowing you to do is it's allowing your body to take in all this sensory data around you, pop culture references, movie quotes, the science article you read, a philosophy book you studied in school, that psychology article someone sent you. And then your brain goes, okay, here's A, B, C, D, and E. Whoa, I've actually just invented this whole other thing called blip. Doesn't even have a name yet. And so we conceptually blend things that we know and things that the world knows, and we connect dots in ways that the world has never seen before. Like, what if fear attacks creatives in particular, because it itself is not creative at all.
Yeah.
And so when we're stuck in that prefrontal cortex, what is actually happening on a physiological level is that the more you're firing those neurons, you start to have a very natural byproduct called glutamate. But when you overstrain that part of the brain, those buildups reach toxic levels. And for years, Jacqueline, scientists thought that when we would switch out of that into like a more low cost, low effort, high, instant reward kind of activity, we were doing it just because we wanted to feel good. Like the brain was just craving like a feel good hit. And that's part of it. But we now know as of 2022, the study out of Oxford shows us that it actually happens because the brain is preserving brain functioning. That if it didn't pivot out of that overuse of the prefrontal cortex, the glutamate would actually reach toxic levels. So that's a big, important mouthful to set up some of the science here. But the more interesting thing that I want to talk to your people about, so can you indulge me for just a few more minutes here?
I love this. No,
okay,
keep going there.
Is something called Bayesian brain theory. So Bayesian brain theory is the idea that your brain is an incredible prediction machine. It's why it's often called predictive brain theory. Like, take this baby to Vegas. Like, it's got those kind of odds. Like, it's better than the odds makers in Vegas on whether or not this thing you're about to do, you will actually be successful at it before you even start. And it's basing that, again, on all of this previous data, all of the inputs, all of the sensory observations, what has always been true before, what has always worked before. And so if you go to start something new, like writing a book, and you're sitting at that desk with the blinking cursor judging you, your brain's going to make an assessment on whether or not you're going to be able to do this based on what has always been true. And it's going to go, nope, if you've ever had a nope, moment, this record scratch, just kidding, 90-degree turn to go clean out the junk drawer instead, or write something on your to-do list you've already done just so you can mark it off again. Then your brain is basically deciding you don't have a chance based on what's always been true before of doing that thing, so why even bother? It's an amygdala hijack. It's literally hijacking you from your best work. And so when we show up every day and do these small but important commitments that we actually keep to ourselves, where we're like promises we keep to ourselves, where we're doing small but hard and then increasingly larger hard things, and we're building up that kind of repertoire, we're putting in the reps, we're putting in the, building up those muscles of doing hard things. We are saying to our brains, look, we can do hard things.
Yeah.
We can sit through the edginess of the blinking cursor and not run away instantly.
Yeah.
And your brain will go, cool. And it will update the model. And so every day you show up and you do a small but meaningful, hard thing. It's like a quarter in the piggy bank or a drop in the bucket, more input into the machine. And your brain will update the odds and the statistics, and it will stop hijacking you from your most important work. So the more we do hard things, the more we can do hard things.
I love that. Yeah, keeping promises to yourself. Who talks a lot about that? Ed Mylett. I used to listen to him pretty often. I haven't recently, but I remember that's one thing he always said is the importance of keeping promises to yourself.
Yeah.
And I mean, again, if you can't keep a promise to yourself, like, where's your confidence in anything that you say that you either tell yourself you can do or even other people?
Right.
Another thing too, Mary, and I actually spoke briefly about this with your friend Allison Cook, who I had on the show not too long ago. She's incredible. Also, I'm a huge fan of her work as well. But we spoke about rumination briefly. And I'm really curious to what your take is on, this again is something everyone deals with. I struggle with it a lot. And that is, ruminating over past decisions, thinking, what if I had done something different, or wanting to go back in time and changing, the decision, thinking that we have control over the outcome, which again, I've realized we actually really don't in the grand scheme of life. But for folks who do struggle with that like constant sense of rumination, it could be over the same decision, it could be over, multiple things. How would you go about, recommending they address that?
Yeah. What that word brings up for me is this idea of regret, right?
Yeah.
And one of the things, Jacqueline, that I set out to do from a very young age, like teenager age, I would say, is to live a life without regret. Because I watched my parents both live with tons of regret. My dad always had very secretly, and not so secretly, dreamed of going to college to study history and never believed he could. One kindergarten teacher crushed that dream for him. He got called on, didn't know the answer, the class laughed, and from then on, he just thought he wasn't cut out for school, even though he secretly dreamed of going. They got married super young. I don't know that they specifically regretted that part, but it certainly set up things to be harder. They bought a trailer instead of waiting for a house, and it immediately started falling apart. There was just this snowball of bad and hard decisions. And so, and also, I just don't really think they were very happy in their marriage from the first minute. I'm about the only thing that came out of it that they agree on,
Yeah.
And so it became like, I just sort of set this goal for myself. I'm going to live a life where I never, ever, ever have regrets. Now, as a 45-year-old, I can tell you that that's a both and, right? I have made lots of choices, like not going to work at a law firm in London or New York, a 6-figure offer when I was graduating law school with bonuses and moving benefits.
Also, too, Mary, I forgot to tell you, my sister does tax law. She went to Georgetown. So I understand that lifestyle very much. So everything you spoke about in your book, too, I was like, I've heard this before.
Yeah. So one of the law firms was like, oh, when you have to cancel your vacation because of the law firm will reimburse you. And I said, if you think that's a selling point, we have a problem. I don't know what to tell you. They're competing to see who they can sleep under their desk the most. And so I have made lots of my decisions about living a life of never having to wonder what if. I now know at 45 years old, it's also virtually impossible to not have any regrets.
Right.
There's my not being with my grandma when she passed away because I was somewhere working on my business. We were shooting a wedding somewhere and couldn't be there. But maybe minimizing the risk. And there's a part in Underestimated where I talk about one of the first steps you're going to have to do is grieve the story you thought you would be living by now. Grieve how much further along you could have been if you didn't have to stop to do all this healing from your story first. And so that kind of gets into chapter 11, which is failure as a bankrupt identity and sort of all the ways we fail at failing, where we go, I messed that up, therefore I'm just a mess up, or I failed at that, therefore I'm a failure. There are a few ways we fail at failing. We either make it all about our identity, I failed, so I'm a failure, or we go the opposite extreme where we go, oh, it's everybody else's fault, like a victim mentality, or we kind of hang out in the middle of apathy of like, oh, I used to want to do that, but now I don't really think I do anymore.
Yeah.
And so all of those things, I think, combine and come together of like, this is going to be an inevitable part of life. There are going to be things that you wish went differently. Yeah. There are going to be things you wish you had handled better, that you had more wisdom, that you'd gotten more counsel from wise people who've been there before. But none of it, absolutely none of it will be wasted.
Yeah.
I use my law degree in our business all the time, both the photography business and now as an author.
Yeah.
I don't need to get my contract looked at because I know what I'm looking for.
Right. Yep.
We use all of the things we learned about digital marketing as photographers now in my author business, et cetera. You get the idea.
Yeah.
So you carry it all with you, and every bit of it can make you a better leader, a better author, better in your craft if you choose to let it be about the work and not about, my identity. I'm just a mess up, so I better not do it anyway.
Yeah.
That's a really long answer to it cannot be avoided, so you better find ways to make friends with it.
Yeah, no, that's so good. One thing you mentioned too is this all or nothing mentality, right? And I feel like I'm very much like that. I feel like, again, if I'm committed to something, I'm either 100% in or not in at all.
Yeah.
Is there a relationship between like personality type and that type of mentality or upbringing or environment? Like, is there any research around that?
I don't know that specific research to upbringing and that.
I would be curious.
But what my gut instinct is that it's a cousin of survival mode.
Yeah.
Survival mode is not about, let me develop a discipline, or, let me become a master of my craft, or, let me put in my 10,000 hours, studying photography. Survival mode is how do I get through this day?
Yeah.
And survival mode is wildly addictive.
Yeah.
in chapter 3, self-sabotage is a shot glass, we go into all of that about this return to chaos, even when we consciously would say, of course I don't want to have a chaotic home life now like my childhood was. Of course I don't want to live financially strapped like my parents always were. But subconsciously, because our brain craves familiarity, we return to patterns regardless of whether they're healthy or not, simply because they're familiar and they're comfortable. We mistake comfortable for safe. And so I do think there's probably a correlation between like chaotic childhoods, which flips the switch for survival mode, and then being very all or nothing, right? We're sprinting forward or we're freezing. We're fleeing or we're freezing, kind of an idea. And man, do I go into that a lot in the book of like, I'm just not a naturally consistent person. I am, but here's the good part. There's another part in the book that says, change that script for I am becoming a blank. Yeah. So I am becoming a consistent person. My husband and I both we were not raised or born to be very consistent people, but in the last 5 to 10 years, we have become very, very different. Yeah. We've become people who send something right out the second it's ordered, or who get right back to those people, or who put in the reps on the podcast, or I put in the reps writing the book. Right. And that's really the backbone of the book. You are showing yourself through small but important habits, small but important commitments you keep to yourself, that you're becoming that grown-up in the room who can be trusted, that Dr. Allison Cook talked about.
I love that. And this concept of neuroplasticity, right? We know that the brain does, in fact, rewire itself even as we age, and no one is ever actually, quote unquote, stuck, right, in those existing belief systems. Just tactically, Mary, how does one go about, kind of restructuring their brain and their old habits? And there's certainly a lot of things out there on, meditation. We spoke briefly about reframing, but what like simple strategies out there? If someone's listening right now and is like, I have, this belief system that I've held for the past 30 years. How do I change it? What would you tell them?
Yeah, I love that. I love that so much. My dad was always sort of is still famous for saying to me, like, this is the way it is, this is the way it was, this is the way it always will be.
Yeah, like my grandma was like that.
Him. Right. Yeah. And I think this idea of like, you can't teach an old dog new tricks is because the old dog has decided not to learn. Yeah. Right. Like the Henry Ford quote, which is, whether you think you can or you think you can't, you're right. Mm-hmm. Whether you think you can or you think you can't, that's what's going to happen. Yeah. And so I think on a practical level, we begin by kind of like, again, sort of thinking about those like small but important commitments and paying in the act of noticing. So in the chapter on procrastination, I quote Dr. Judson Brewer, author of The Craving Mind, about the habit loop. And he's talking about how the basic habit loop is trigger, behavior, reward. He said it's wired for our survival and also our procrastination, right? And so trigger can either be saber-toothed tiger is attacking us, or I need to go write the next chapter. And our brain has a very difficult time determining the difference between those two threats. And so the trigger that makes us flee and run to the couch and, watch a whole season of Mrs. Maisel and eat M&Ms and popcorn. And our brain goes, oh, you got away from the threat. Here's a reward. Here's some dopamine. You instantly made us feel good. Here's some reward. Right. Well, Dr. Brewer says the antidote to that is actually noticing, because you have convinced yourself that it feels good to procrastinate. You've convinced yourself that it feels good to have plans canceled at the last minute. And man, do I agree with that as an introvert. It really does feel good to be like, I thought I had stuff all afternoon and now I don't.
Also too, Mary, I love the story that you mentioned how you would always wait until like last minute to get something done because you got like such a high from it with your papers.
Such
and
a high.
You would always end up crushing it. That resonated with me.
That whole chapter kicks off with I turned in a very, very important paper in college with literally 23 seconds remaining in the class because it had to be turned in class. Yep. So listen, your girl likes to procrastinate. But he talks about noticing, and he talks about actually paying attention to how horrible it feels when you are procrastinating. Yeah. How horrible it feels to have that reputation with people, how horrible it feels to be like, have people waiting on you and like, yeah, you did it and you pulled it off and you got the A+, but you were kind of a pain to work with. Yeah. And how that's not the impeccable integrity of our word we want to stand for. So we just start, or just regardless of all that stuff, it just feels really terrible when you have this thing hanging over your head. Yeah. And when you're doing that, what you're doing is rewiring your brain. Hebb's law, the neurons that fire together, wire together, they move closer together. They have stronger bonds that will fire quicker than the ones that don't. And so you're showing your brain, you think that we're doing this to feel good, but in fact, it really doesn't. And just noticing that can help your brain rewire.
Yeah, so true. And it makes me think too of just like those those jerk impulses, like whenever I do have a trigger, right? It's always typically like revert to Google, which is probably the worst thing that anyone should ever be doing. But in the moment, like we feel good when we're researching a question, thinking that, you know, we're getting information. And I mean, even Mary, it's like if I apply this to a medical context, like, you know, with my mom, and I've shared this many a time on my podcast, but it's been very overwhelming to navigate all of the different options out there for cancer, right? Like there is so much. And, you know, that's why I'm a proponent of an integrative approach to cancer, but there's just so much out there, Mary. And everyone's always like throwing this at you, like, oh, like I did this and I did this and this worked. And it's just, you know, you mentioned the word noise before, but it's really just cutting through the noise of everything that is out there. And that's kind of why even the mission of WellnStrong has evolved a lot over the past year or so, because I've just recognized that, you know, coming from a faith background as well, like we are to be stewards of our bodies. We are to like do what we can. But at the end of the day, God is in control of the outcome of whatever treatment someone pursues. And that has just kind of taken like this burden off of my shoulders to think that I am in control when I really am not in control. So I think, you know, rumination, overthinking, like it stems from this false belief that we have control when we really don't.
You know what came up for me though when you were talking that I think is like the important flip side of that coin is that recognizing that things like rumination, overthinking, procrastination, you know, like all of these things that are kind of a natural part of our brain, like our brain is wired this way, right?
Yeah.
That is a beautiful function of free will.
Yeah.
That is a beautiful function that allows for something called free will. And then we get the choice whether we're going to continue the loop and continue to procrastinate or continue to lean into fear, continue to, you know, think we failed so we're a failure, or whether we're going to do that work to take our thoughts captive. Taking our thoughts captive is in and of itself an act of free will. We can either do it or we can't, or we don't, you know? And I think that's really beautiful, you know, because it's like we're given the ability to, we have the choice to rewire our brain. Whether we're the old dog who learns new tricks is up to us.
Yeah. Have you heard of Jo Hargreaves, Mary?
No, I haven't.
You would really like her. I had her on the podcast, I want to say 2 or so months ago. She is based in the UK and she calls herself, I think it's a faith-filled therapist is her Instagram handle. I'll send it to you. But we had a whole episode again dedicated to, you know, taking your thoughts captive. And it's a wrestling match. You know, people think like when you actually really get into it, like it's, you know, it's not easy. It's a mental battle, you know?
Yeah. I don't know why this is how my brain works, but I had the funniest visual of like Home Alone flash through my brain. Like that's the kind of like captive you're trying to take, you know? They're there to try to like, you know, oh, he's just a little kid. What are you going to do? But there's like paint buckets being thrown at you.
And it's
little
just,
cars on the floor, whatever.
But to your point about, you know, neurons that wire together, fire together, like again, like it's a training ground. It really is. Yeah. One other thing too, Mary, I wanted to ask your thoughts on. So I think you mentioned imposter syndrome. And this I actually learned, I want to say freshman year of college at Babson. We had this course called FME, Foundations in Management and Entrepreneurship, where basically 50 freshmen were just put together and they told us to create a product. And that was our essentially class, right? And we were graded not on the success or the profit, or we were graded not on the profit that we made from the product, but rather our ability to, you know, get along with each other and delegate. And, you know, so it was an interesting experience, but part of that course was this whole behavioral component. And they spoke a lot about imposter syndrome. And at the time I was like, oh, like it's a weird name. But the more I got into it and the more I, you know, as I grew older too, everyone suffers from imposter syndrome. So for folks who have not heard of this term before, I'd love if you could explain A, what is it? And B, how do we overcome it?
Yeah. So at its most core, the fear that we call imposter syndrome is really a fear of being found out. Being found out as not as qualified or equipped or together or, you know, in control or smart or talented or whatever the fill in the blank is, as you should be in order to be up for this opportunity or to be in this position. You know, this is Moses saying, I have a stuttering problem. What are you talking about? I should go be the one to talk to Pharaoh. Like, I'm clearly not the guy. And what we find is that it does attack everyone, but it actually attacks people who are high achievers or who are wired or called to big things, higher, goals. It attacks us in a higher proportion. The psychologists who originally coined the phrase are Dr. Clance and Dr. Imes, and they originally called it imposter phenomenon among high achieving women. And I joke in the book that I actually like that better because, syndrome makes me feel like I'm like the lone soul patient zero suffering from this self-doubt virus or whatever. And phenomenon makes me feel like we're in it together. And I share a bunch of quotes from like Maya Angelou and, 6-time Oscar nominated 2-time winner Tom Hanks and Hermione Granger herself, the ultimate overachiever. Where they're talking about like, it almost feels like the better I do or the more that I achieve, the worse my imposter syndrome gets, because I feel like any minute I'm going to be found out. Any minute they're going to be like, just kidding, you didn't deserve any of this. And it's all going to be taken away. There's a line in the book that feels like a particular punch to my own gut, which is overachievers simply can't believe that they have anything to offer the world, which means they believe it can also be taken away at any minute. And we are the ones who are relentlessly tough on ourselves. And so what's interesting about imposter syndrome really quickly is it's based on this, another one of those habit loops called magical ritual thinking, which is the belief among people like myself, probably people like you, these very high achievers, like the world would look at them and go, that is the most put together woman in the room. Like, whoa.
Meanwhile, we're like, what is going on?
Right. To us, we're like, whoo, where? Behind me? I don't know what you're talking about. We feel like the hot mess, right? And so the magical ritual thinking is the belief that we have to be relentlessly hard on ourselves. We have to rip ourselves to shreds. We have to assume we will fail in order to succeed. That's like the superstitious behavior. It's like a baseball player wearing the same dirty socks, right? We think we have to assume we're going to fail. That is the only way we succeed. And that if we were to ever show up and have any kind of self-confidence or speak kindly to ourselves or believe it was going to go okay, that hubris of thinking we might actually relax a little, that would be the moment we would fail.
It's so funny you say that too, because as you're talking, I'm just thinking, even with me, like I always struggle with, the Bible too says expect good things, right? Expect good things from God. And that's obviously an important factor, vision what you want to happen, right? So I always struggle with that, right? Envisioning the outcome of success. But then to your point too, like assuming I'm going to fail, and I feel like I'd rather be pleasantly surprised and like vision the success and then have it not be successful. So that resonates with me.
I think that's what you just hit on is so important there, Jacqueline. It is this belief that we will somehow insulate ourselves from disappointment.
Yes.
If we told ourselves we didn't think it was going to go very well. When in fact, if it didn't go very well, we would still be just as disappointed.
Right.
If I got an F on that exam, I'm going to be really mad no matter what.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that whole idea of like, believing that there's a hope and a future. There's a scripture somebody sent me in February when I was at a conference that is basically that idea of like ask for what you want. And like that kind of blew my mind because it's like like the second into prosperity gospel and like manifesting or whatever. Like so I'd like to spend like just like 4 weeks just thinking on that basically. But like that whole idea of exceedingly abundantly more than anything we could ask or think, right? And my friend Nicole Zazowski has a book called What If It's Wonderful? And it's like we're not wired that way. We are wired as a survival mechanism. It's called negativity bias. Because when we're looking for danger everywhere, we're the ones who don't get eaten by the saber-toothed tiger. Right. And then that gets passed down because we're the ones who survive. So then like cavemen or whatever are having kids more wired to see danger everywhere because that's what kept them alive. In order to have kids. And so it is an actual I call it in the book, the first inherited limiting belief leak. And so, I think that we think we'll actually like, oh, don't get your hopes up. It's just a really good way to live your life with not a lot of hope.
Yeah. Often too, I'm having a flashback now. I feel like I'm having more flashbacks to college in this episode than I've had in the past decade of life. But I remember freshman year of college, Mary, I was doing case interviews for consulting. That's what I initially did after graduating. I did strategy consulting. And I remember just spending hours and hours reading, Mark Cosentino's Case in Point and going through these, difficult case interviews. And I remember I had my first case, my first round, it was like a 3-hour case. And I literally, Mary, walked out of the door and I called my dad. This is junior year of college. And I was crying. And I was like, Dad, like I completely bombed that interview. Like I'm not going to get, the job. I worked so hard training. And I was like, I was a mess. Long story short, I ended up getting the job, and that's where I started my career at Fidelity Consulting. I remember the initial like team meeting we had, the man who interviewed me told me, he's like, you crushed that case. Like you had the best interview.
Wow.
And I looked at him, I was like, Andy, I was like, are we talking about the same interview? Like I don't recall my doing well at all. But that also kind of opened my eyes to your point earlier, like even just about perception, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like we think, I found most of the times, even in life, whether it's a grade in school, right? I always come out of it thinking I did horribly, but in reality, like you actually did really great.
That's right.
So it's like that, the distortion of how we also see our, what we do in life and our successes or failures. It's really interesting.
And then the danger, Jacqueline, like for you in that scenario, is your brain, because your brain is constantly trying to make sense of things, this meaning-making part of your brain could very quickly go, oh, so when I think I messed it up really bad, that's when I actually crushed it. So I need to go into everything thinking I'm going to mess it up really bad.
Yes, Mary, exactly. Yeah. That's what I'm saying. And it's like, rather to be pleasantly surprised than,
Right. Well, but I think women, we just have to call this part out. Women in particular are wired not to show this kind of overconfidence. This, I used that word earlier, hubris.
Yes.
And so even in launching this book, I've had these 3 quiet forms of resistance I'm going to tell you about right now. Let me connect the dots before I tell you the 3. So going back to what I was just saying, we're trained to not believe in ourselves. We're trained definitely not to voice belief in ourselves. We're trained to expect to like, oh, I don't know, like give me your scraps. I guess that'll be okay. And then when we get the A+, we're shocked, right? And so 3 quiet forms of resistance I've had to all of that while launching this book is, number 1, if somebody goes, oh my gosh, you're such a beautiful writer, I go, thank you so much. I really appreciate that. The end. Not, oh my gosh, that one chapter I just really struggle with. And I don't know. I think I overuse metaphor. I'm not really sure. Thank you. Period.
Yeah.
Quiet. Number 1. Number 2, when I was, teasing the book was coming out, this is the proudest I've been of this book. Let me tell you something. This work I'm about to put into the world, this work is good. Good. Calling our own work good as women is something we struggle with. Mm-hmm. The nerve. The arrogance. Mm-hmm. This book is good. I have a friend, Antonio Neves, who says we should be able to talk about our own work with the same enthusiasm we would recommend somebody else go see Hamilton, or that movie that we love, or that concert that we love, that band that we love, because we know what they're about to experience. And then number 3 is casting a vision on where I go from here. I believe I will speak to stadiums at some point about this book or about this message in general.
Yeah. Can I be in the front row when you do?
Yes. But you know what's cool about that, Jacqueline, is 10 years ago in my photography workshops, I would say, I'm going to write a book one day. And now I'm getting messages from people who are like, I remember 10 years ago when you said you were going to do this. Now you're on your 3rd book. So we cast a vision, and it gives other people permission to cast visions for their lives too. Yeah.
Mary, one thing I love, and I don't know if you've ever done this before, and I was actually talking to my dad about this the other day, I love vision boarding. So this is a practice that I honestly started back in high school. Yeah. And it's been so special to me because I have pictures of these boards I made, back when I was 14, 15, of things that I wanted in life. And, even in Boston, right after college, I remember writing down on a notepad, this was after a breakup I had. And I was just kind of revisiting, what I wanted to do with my life. Like, what were my goals coming out of this, shakeup? And I wrote on that notepad, I was like, I want to be an influential person in the wellness space. Wow. And then I wrote, I want to be able to do WellnStrong full time. And this was 4 or 5 years ago. And when I was writing this down, I was like, whatever, like wild dreams. And I came across that sticky note a couple months ago, and I was home going through some old things. And I just stared at that. And I was just like, would the girl who wrote this note, 4 or 5 years ago, ever believe that would come to pass?
Right.
And that's why one thing that I'm, a huge advocate for is writing down your goals, whether it's in a journal, whether it's making a vision board, because there's so much power. And I think there's a stat, it's like you're 44% more likely to accomplish a goal if it's written down.
That's right.
And like less than 2% of people actually write down their goals. Yes. So, whether it's yearly goals or weekly goals, I think always having those in front of you is so important. Mm-hmm. And with that too, Mary, that lends to my next question for you. Are there any daily habits or rituals that you do on a daily basis that you believe have helped in your success? Because I certainly am a huge fan of affirmations. I love Norman Vincent Peale. He's like one of my all-time favorites. He's one of the greats for me. But yeah, just power of positive thinking. I'm curious what your habits are.
Yeah, I'm going to answer that question, but you have to know that I am a podcast host as well. And so I'm over here like dancing in my seat, wanting to ask you questions. And so
Mary, this is going to be the first of many conversations we're going to have.
Amazing. I love it. Okay, so I'm going to set up the question this way, and here's why I'm asking it. So there's a part in chapter 5 of Underestimated where I'm talking about a conversation I had with Jason Van Ruler, author of Get Past Your Past, when he was on my podcast, and we've done Instagram lives and things like that together. And in Get Past Your Past, he talks about those of us who had hard stories, we can fall in love with self-improvement and self-help and success books and things like that when we're little. He talks about, like, I would always want to be reading books about how to dress and how to achieve and how to be. And he said that that's, so great and so good, but it also leaves us with this impression that we always have to be different. And he and I really connected on that because I have a deep love of self-help and self-improvement, and I'm just constantly trying to, like, how can I refine this? Let's get a little bit better every day.
Yeah.
It's literally something I think about on a daily basis. And so you've mentioned so many success books and so many, like, thought leaders in that space, and you're clearly doing that work. And so the question for me is I want to know, like, what your childhood was like. Like, is there like a hard story? Are you resonating with that? Is there a hard story there? Or was it just like something that was instilled in you from parents? But like, where does this love of improvement come from?
No, I mean, that's spot on. I think what I didn't have growing up plays a factor in what I want now and what I want to give my parents. And I think too, like, my parents worked so hard, as many listeners' parents have for the sake of their children. And I think they sacrificed a lot, just in terms of putting my sister and I, through good school systems. And growing up, I always watched them work so hard, always thinking I want to give back to them. Yeah. Right. And that has been my driving force. WellnStrong is certainly meant to help people improve their lives. But, even in college, when I was pursuing consulting or investment banking, like, my incentive or my driving factor behind making a lot of money was to care for my parents and, help them because they have done so much for me. But yeah, I mean, certainly that I'm going to listen to that episode that you had with him because I feel like that would resonate with me as well.
Yeah, it's so good. So money was tight.
Yeah.
Yeah. So for a lot of us in that position, whether it's money was tight or things were just chaotic at home or things were just really hard in our stories, we have parents, that just weren't available because they were working so hard or they had their own demons or whatever. We can become what I call in my second book, Slow Growth Equals Strong Roots, the illusionist in the distance, where we're perpetually chasing these future versions of us we're trying to become. There's a part where I talk about there's 1,000 supposed to be illuminated illusion versions of us standing on 1,000 mountaintop moments in the distance that we have not yet achieved. She turns to look for us just a second, hair billowing but never seeming to land, these white robes all around her, looks into a dimly lit mirror reflection, of her own eyes, smiles a superior smile, and then goes on without us. We know what it's like to have been left by somebody we love, but we cannot contain the heartbreak of when we leave ourselves, right? Like this kind of idea. And so we're constantly chasing this. When I'm her, when I'm this version of myself, when I eat the bag of kale, Jacqueline, that's in the back of the refrigerator before it goes bad, when my handwriting doesn't look like a serial killer but has the perfect swoop, when everything is color-coded, when I always have my hair and makeup done at the same time, whatever. Then I can get started. Yeah. And that's the moving target, this vanishing point at the horizon we chase our whole lives. When I am her, who's always up ahead, then I can begin. So all of that to say, through that filter, I do have things like that, but I always try to keep in mind of, for me, the same way that thought process can lead to that magical ritual, imposter syndrome of I must always feel like I flopped in order to crush it. For me, I always want to be getting better because that is how I'm wired, but I don't want to let it keep me from starting now. So some things that I do on a daily basis, I walk. Walk is a huge part. That gets into, like, my friend Allie Fallon talks about, when you think limbic brain, that conceptual blending part of your brain, think limbs. So that's stretching, that's dancing, that's going on a walk. I think it was Thoreau who took like a 3-hour walk every afternoon as
that's
a huge part of his writing practice.
Mary, I average, you're going to think I'm crazy, I average like 18 or 20 miles a day from walking. I also don't have a car. People look at me like I'm crazy here in Greenville, but I mean, most of the time, that's how I do my thinking, right? So even if I have calls, like I'll take them when I'm, walking. I certainly can't do podcast walking, but if I could, I would. But it helps me think.
We do about 5 or 6 here, and I thought we were overachievers. Like, wow.
Come visit me. We'll go walking together.
I would love that. But you, as you know, when you're walking like that left, right of your steps helps engage left, right of your brain.
Yeah.
It's moving you into the limbic part of your brain. If you ever have your best thoughts in the shower, right? Listen, I can get up on a soapbox right now, and I'm about to.
I love it.
It literally breaks my heart. I'm not being maybe just a tiny bit hyperbolic, but as close to not hyperbolic as possible. It literally breaks my heart. The works of writing, the works, of literature, of art, of poetry, of song, of painting that we are going to miss out on because we live in a world that doesn't allow us to be bored anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's always a phone in our back pocket to whip out if we're in that waiting room.
Yeah.
Or if we have to walk somewhere, we can put the music in our ears, whatever.
Yeah.
I think we're going to be a generation lacking in art. Not entirely lacking, but we're going to miss a lot of it that we could have otherwise had because there's always a distraction in our back pocket.
Yeah.
So anyway, the walking is a big part of my routine.
Yeah.
It activates that limbic brain. It activates the imagination. It allows me to be bored. I get my best business and creative thoughts out there.
Silent walks. I used to walk Mary all the time. And again, I've changed a lot, but I would always have to have a podcast on the old me. Like I would always have to be learning something and, 7:00 in the morning, going for my morning walks with my earphones in.
Yeah.
And it's just it was so much noise. And I find that now, like, there's a few select podcasts I listen to. Yours is going to be one of them because I love you. I'm a big fan of yours, and I'm so glad I have you on the show.
Right back at
you. I can't wait to listen to yours, but I limit the amount of information I take in, and that has been such a game changer for me.
Yeah. Except for anybody who's listening to this, if you're walking and listening to this episode right now, you get a pass.
Yeah, exactly. just this episode.
No, but truly, I think the silent walks are a big part of it. I will circle my kitchen island also walking. I will circle it a bunch, like hundreds of times in prayer. Yeah. I find, sort of like a Jericho walk kind of.
I love that.
What are some other things that are really important? Sleep has become really, really important. Good sleep hygiene and good sleep routines. I would say that those are probably the big three. I'm sure there are a bunch of, I really start to think about them, but then I just know my tendencies and I can very easily skew the other, the extreme of like, well, I didn't do 40 sit-ups before I drank a green thing, before I did 45 minutes of meditation or whatever. So I can't even begin this day.
Yeah.
So I would say like find your non-negotiables.
Yeah. What do you do for fun, Mary? Do you have like a hobby that you like to do for fun?
I am, as you have probably already seen from this random Home Alone reference I gave you, I'm a huge movie person. I'm like, I call them the talkies, because that's what they first were called when they weren't silent anymore. I like going to the theater to see a movie is the ultimate experience for me. I absolutely love it. I will say I've fallen a little bit out of going. This is another soapbox I could get up on. People on their phones. If you can't go 90 minutes without getting on your phone in a movie, just don't go to the movie.
Yeah.
Or, we've had people smoke pot behind us and do all sorts of other stuff, whatever. So it gets getting harder to love the theater. So we always have to go like on a Monday at 9 a.m. when nobody is there or whatever. Yeah. But I love the movies. We watch them at home. We have like our favorites. We're usually a movie of some sort for Halloween.
Yeah.
So I'm just, like the Jaws 50th anniversary is today, I think, or tomorrow. We were Jaws one year for Halloween. So I'm just a huge movie person. That's a big one for me.
I love that.
That'll be I could give you 4 more answers, but they're long answers.
Good.
So
I think, I found too, anything, kind of similar to that forces you to be present, focusing on something is like, that in itself is a game changer. And there's so much research around that, right? Like just presence. So one thing I've been doing is I like to host game nights at my apartment. And I haven't played Monopoly since I was 5 or 6. And one of my friends, it's his new favorite game, or he loves Monopoly. So we always play, and it's so fun. And just having friends over and being present in the moment, or painting. So just activities that really force you to be in the present, not ruminating on the past or obsessing over the future.
Right. Are
the healthiest activities that I just get so much joy and energy from. you know?
I love that. Yeah, you're 100% right. I won't go too far down this rabbit trail, but did you ever see that Pixar movie? I think it's Pixar. Soul?
No, I'm adding it to my list. Movie this weekend.
There you go. So the
Soul.
short synopsis of the plot is that there's a jazz musician who's about to get his big break. He's about to play at like this venue or something, or in front of somebody. It's going to be his big break. And he falls through a manhole and he dies. Super uplifting movie already. But he goes, I mean, this is not like, obviously not a specifically Christian movie, but he goes to some form of the afterlife, and he's like on the escalator to go up, and he decides to hop off and like explore the rest of the afterlife. And there's this one sort of desolate wasteland that he walks through where all the, picture like the not exactly this, but this is the energy when Ursula takes and they shrivel up in the jar or whatever. That kind of energy, right? And they're like in a wasteland and they're all miserable. Yeah. And he asked, like, well, who are these people? And it was basically like the people who are not being present to their own lives. They're either stuck in that regret or that, why did I do that? Or grieving that, or they're ruminating over the future. Interestingly, this is a bit of a like wrench in the story that they come back to that place later in the movie, and the people who are in a state of flow doing work they love also can be in that wasteland because they are also checked out of their lives. Yeah. So that was really fascinating as somebody who goes into deep flow when I'm writing. I had to think about that a little bit more.
That's so interesting.
Yeah.
One last thing, Mary. I want to be conscious of your time, but I could talk to you for another few hours. But I recently celebrated my 30th birthday.
Nice.
And
Happy birthday.
Time. Thank you. And it's a time, I mean, it's certainly a time of reflection, right? A new decade of life. And I just, it hit me again how quickly life goes by.
Yes.
And I mean, obviously that's because I'm, 30 and not 5. So certainly I understand, I have more years under my belt, but I've realized that, in order to like make memories also too of life stages, I have to be intentional about creating time to do things, right? Whether it's a game night or a paint night or a trip somewhere. So I have a new kind of, trying to abide by this, but a new habit where I like to do at least like one memorable thing each month that I can actually remember the month by.
Yes.
And similarly too, there's a practice, like one word for your year that I started back in, I think 23, where I chose a word for the year, and that would be like what I lived by. Right. Yeah. And I had a conversation on my podcast too, not too long ago, how that also kind of helps make your life like a book, where each word is a chapter. Yeah. And I can clearly remember each year now based on that word.
That's good. That's really good.
So just like little things like that, assist with the sense of presence in life and remembering and like, being in flow at points, but also taking a step back and reflecting on, okay, like what have I done? Where do I want to go? And just showing yourself grace.
I read an article that's so interesting. I read an article and it was talking about if you want to make the weekend seem longer, not while you're actually living it, but on Monday when you're reflecting back on, did I have a good weekend or not? It said you have to do new things.
Yes.
So not just like things you enjoy, but some of them have to be new. So one of the reasons that we remember, like the first 5 years of our lives seemed like it was forever.
Everything's novel.
Is because everything's novel. We're experiencing it for the first time. And so we have to find ways to do that. And Justin and I feel this all the time when we will do something even slightly different, like a different farmer's market.
Right.
Or we'll eat this in the park instead of over there. Or we'll go explore a new town that we've never been to, whatever. Yeah. It will go so fast in the moment because you're having so much fun.
Yeah.
Time flies when you're having fun.
Right.
But on Monday / the rest of your life, it will feel longer. So if you extrapolate that out, your life will feel longer and fuller the more you're doing things that scare you that you've never done before or whatever.
That's so true. Yeah, getting out of the routine. Mary, that should be your next book. I'll co-write with you.
Okay, deal.
How to make your weekends feel longer. Everyone will pick it up.
It'll be a bestseller.
Mary, this has been so much fun. You are truly such a joy. I really do hope to meet you one day in person. You have to come visit me in Greenville. Yeah. But with that, where can listeners find you? Where can they pick up a copy of your awesome books? Yeah. Give us all of the details.
Yeah, so a really great place to start is if you go to namethefear.com. So the book is Underestimated, the surprisingly simple shift to quit playing small, name the fear, and move forward anyway. And so namethefear.com. We actually have the whole first chapter up there for free for you. You can download and read it today, get a feel for my writing, which is that very storytelling, unexpected and visual metaphor style. I always say it's like pop culture meets psychology and, like poetry meets intellect, whatever.
It's relatable, Mary. That's one thing that I felt like I was talking to you, and like I feel like I know you just from reading your book. And I think like if a reader can step away from a book feeling that, it's a success.
Thank you. I love that. I love that. A lot of people have said, like, why are you reading my diary? Why are you in my email? So it for sure will call you out, but in the best way possible. So namethefear.com, you can get the chapter. And then if you go to achieverquiz.com, we've actually put together, like I say, it's a 2-minute quiz, 10 minutes if you overthink it, based around what I identify as the 5 achiever types. And based on your achieving type, you will play small in different ways, Jacqueline, and then you will need different things to get unstuck. And so we have our performer who's always on their toes, needs to show themselves, but for sure the world, how far they've come. I am the classic performer. We have our tightrope walker who could care less who's clapping, but they need higher and higher death-defying feats to feel the same amount of good. Our masquerader just hides in plain sight because they don't want to let anybody down, including themselves. The contortionist is the classic people pleaser. They contort because it is easier than being criticized. And then our illusionist in the distance, like I talked about, is they don't want to start until all the conditions to begin and they themselves are perfect. So achieverquiz.com. 10 minutes if you overthink it to take the quiz. The questions are light and funny. In true Mary form, the results go really deep. I've had people say, why am I crying at reading, my results?
I'm going to take that.
If you go take it there, achieverquiz.com. And then I'm at Mary Marantz, Marantz on Instagram. Come tell me what your achiever type is.
Awesome. I love that. Mary, this has been so much fun. I really looking forward to my next conversation with you. But my last question for you, this is always my favorite one to ask. And that is, what does being well and strong mean to you?
Jacqueline, I was thinking about this just based on like what you were sharing about your heart of why you started all this. My mom's mom, my grandma on that side, died before I was ever born. She died suddenly at 39 of a sudden hardening of the arteries, sudden heart attack. She'd worked in like a tire plant factory. I think probably in like the 1970s, the conditions were not really great. And she was a smoker and, obviously wasn't eating very great. And so I just turned 45. And so I think being well and strong is about not only living a long life, it's living that like the usable years, right? Like having as many years where you are still able to do the things you were put here to do. Like I really hope that on my deathbed, I'm like, hold on, I have one more sentence, write this down. So I've just been thinking a lot about that in terms of like longevity of like actual being able to enjoy your life, I guess. So I think well and strong is taking care of myself, not out of anything of what the world tells me to be, but because I have so much work, good work I was put here to do that I want to be able to get to.
I love that, Mary. And one last thought that came to mind when you were sharing that, I've started to think a lot more on how is the work I'm doing now impacting the kingdom, right? Like how is that kingdom work? And that also has really changed the way I approach strategizing what I want to do in the next even decade with Well and Strong. And certainly, I mean, what you are doing is certainly kingdom work. You're helping so many people. I'm curious what your role is going to be in eternity, but it makes you think differently, not only in your day to day, but just in our callings and how we spend our time. And food for thought.
Yeah, so good.
Awesome. Well, Mary, again, this has been such a joy. I'm really excited to share this, and I can't wait to have you on again soon.
Yeah, love it. Anytime.